I'd like to apologize for the brief delay. Someone pressed the wrong button on the computer and the program was translated into Spanish. So we had to redo that. But it would have been appropriate because today we're having the world premiere of Lutz Meridional by an Australian composer, Andrián Pertout, who was born in Chile. So we have the Spanish connection and the Australian connection. It will be performed by Michael Kieran Harvey. What to say about Michael Kieran Harvey? I've heard it said frequently that Michael Kieran Harvey is Australia's greatest pianist. And every time I hear that, I say, yes, Michael, I know. But he is truly world-renowned on the piano, but he's much more than that. At FOMA and also in synesthesia, we've been able to enjoy his compositional skills with 48 fugues for Frank and Psychosonata. He's indefatigable in his support of contemporary music, particularly Australian contemporary composers. And he's, even beyond that, a philosopher and an activist. His playing is astonishingly brilliant, as you will hear. And to begin the performance, we're always pushing the boundaries, so these guys have come together and come up with a new style of wordplay, which is known as forensic poetry. And this will be given to you by Arjun von Caemmerer. So let's hear it for this trio of creative people.
It is a privilege and a pleasure, and very exciting, to introduce the premiere performance of Luz Meridional, Dr. Andrián Pertout's 24 Études for Pianoforte. This is an intricate and poetic work that was composed over a 3-year period as part of a 2009 State Library Victoria Creative Fellowship. As recently as December 2012, the prestidigital Luz Meridional was awarded the prestigious Jean Bogan Prize for Piano Composition. The name Luz Meridional is Spanish for Southern Light, and Southern Light evokes an image of the Southern Cross, the constellation of the Crux. In a curious coincidence, exactly such a stellar assemblage is present on the title page of Andrián's score. Luminously defining the 4 poles of this Southern Cross are composer Andrián Pertout, commissioner of the work Julian Burnside QC AO, pianist-composer Michael Kieran Harvey, for whom Andrián especially wrote this music, and that great American musician, composer and writer Henry Cowell, to whom overall this work pays homage. Luz Meridional would not have seen the light of day were it not for the generous commission of Julian Burnside. One could say that in the matter of committing commissions, Mr. Burnside definitely has form. This is his 4th for Andrián since 2008. Whilst it might seem obvious, it is not at all superfluous to note that along with the composer, the enduring beneficiaries of such generosity include the audiences of the work, both now and for the foreseeable future. In his 2004 Peggy Glanville Hicks address, Julian Burnside stated, "There is great force in the notion that art connects us to the world, to each other, to others we can never meet or know. It affirms and reinforces our integral relationship with the rest of humanity. The wider our encounter with art, the richer that connection becomes." These sentiments are especially applicable to the ethos underlying Luz Meridional, as each of Andrián's 24 Études establishes and affirms our relationship and our indebtedness to one of 24 earlier Australian composers. Like the 5th star embedded centrally between the four poles of the Southern Cross. A quotation from each composer shines through each etude, refracted and metamorphosed through time and space, and the complex multiplicity of Andrián's compositional techniques. As Andrián writes, in the tradition of composer, pianist, and theorist Henry Cowell, the work explores a variety of compositional techniques developed during the 20th century by a variety of American experimentalist composers. The 24 solo piano etudes incorporate quotations from early Australian composers and represent a composition project dedicated to researching melodic material from the State Library of Victoria's Manuscripts collection, in order to then compose a set of 24 etudes for solo piano, utilising and transforming this material in various ways. The word etude, derived from the Latin studium and carrying connotations of spirit, devotion, and study, refers to an instrumental piece, especially for the piano, which concentrates on a particular aspect of technique or allows for a display of virtuosity. That Andrián wrote these etudes specifically for the singular talents of the illustrious Michael Kieran Harvey itself speaks volumes. But it is not just for his virtuosity that he's a particularly suitable choice. Michael is well known for his prolific championing of the work of contemporary Australian composers. In Australian Pianists, Martin Comte's recent and illuminating collection of interviews, in response to the question, "Do you include works by Australian composers in your repertoire?" Michael replied, "Of course, in almost every performance. I feel," he said, "a musician should relate first to their immediate community and that the communication spreads outwards in concentric circles. This means that composers within that immediate vicinity are the most important to serve and collaborate with." To continue with Michael's theme of concentric circles, a circumnavigation of the globe at longitude 37 degrees north will eventually cross through Menlo Park in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, the 1897 birthplace of Henry Cowell. A similar circumnavigation at longitude 37 degrees south crosses not only through Melbourne, home of Chilean-born composer Andrián Pertout, but also this circle, allowing a degree of latitude, is close to traversing Santiago in Chile, Andrián's 1963 birthplace. Coincidentally, the image of the Southern Cross resurfaces on one of Chile's regional flags. Therefore, we can perhaps legitimately consider that the link connecting Andrián Pertout to Henry Cowell was written in the stars. Andrián's mixed cultural heritage, a Chilean mother and Slovenian father, has coupled with his early exposure to many diverse musical forms, from the folk musics of South America, Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Union, to the European classical musical tradition and rock, pop, and jazz influences. This has culminated in his frequent integration of non-Western musical devices, such as those derived from Indian, Persian, and Japanese music, into European art music language, which makes him an ideal exponent of Henry Cowell's musical legacy. Like Cowell's, Andrián's musical interests, education, and accomplishments are extremely broad-ranging. He is currently the Australian delegate of the Asian Composers League, president of the Melbourne Composers League, and an honorary fellow both of the Melbourne University Conservatorium of Music and of the Greek National Academy of Music. His multiply awarded music has been performed in over 35 countries. As a writer, Andrián has had over 400 articles published, with subject material ranging from the music of indie pop artist Sheila Chandra and Qawwali singer Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, to interviews with the likes of ex-Zappa alumni, virtuoso guitarist Steve Vai, and the onomatopoeically named drummer Chad Wackerman. Henry Cowell, virtuoso pianist, innovative composer, writer, publisher, educator, and cross-cultural musical catalyst, was a true American pioneer. His free-thinking and far-reaching legacy is evidence that he inherited the spirit of his feisty mother Clarissa, who, in her anarchist newsletter, Enfant Terrible, wrote, "I have no reverence for God, nor parents, nor sovereigns, nor presidents, nor popes, nor bishops, nor dead bodies, nor ancient institutions. In short, I have no reverence for any person or anything." Little wonder she was chuffed when a fairground phrenologist palpated little Henry's head and proclaimed that her child entirely lacked the bump of deference. Charles Seeger, Cowell's mentor and colleague, later unknowingly echoed this assessment, praising Cowell's unconventionally unconventional music and celebrating the healthy absence of veneration or orthodox professionalism, an attitude which he felt had enabled Cowell to follow new paths freely. Although the unbumptious Henry Cowell was demonstrably not of the common mould, he was clearly very much ahead of his time. His epochal 1930 publication, New Musical Resources, detailed the implications of what Cowell dubbed his theory of musical relativity, his interrelating of rhythm and tone, or tempo and pitch, through the ratios of the overtone series. In the introduction, he remarks that the book was first drafted during 1919, and that many of the materials which it predicted would come into music have since been adopted. Many materials which were only vaguely suggested in music at the time and which were pointed out as valid have since been developed to such a degree that it is difficult to realise with what suspicion they were regarded in 1919. His book focused on innovations in the varied fields of tone combinations, such as dissonant counterpoint, rhythm, chord formation, such as tone clusters, and novel notation, becoming something of a Bible to the musical avant-garde. As a prelude to Las Meridional's score, Andrián has included a chart titled The Chromatic Scale and Associated 7-Limit Frequencies Ratios, Tempo, Meter, Pitch, and Rhythmic Pulse Relationships. A chart that is directly based on an expansion of Cowell's theories contained within New Musical Resources. Andrián has included this because he has derived all the polyrhythmic material of Luz Meridional from this chart. Henry Cowell's seminal work is therefore not merely an inspiration, but also functions as a direct source of compositional techniques and ideas. In regard to utilising and transforming his source material, the mathematically inclined Andrián has employed a wide range of compositional techniques. His diverse means includes rhyme schemes, procedures contrapuntal and structures that are formal, quotation and imitation, reharmonization and ornamentation, metric modulations and interval explorations, linear additive models and clusters of combinatorials, canons of tempo and notes ostinato, sequences singing of De Bruyn and bell ringing, inversions and isorhythms, palindromes and polyrhythms, rhythms additional and rhythms non-retrogradable, serialism and pointillism and time point sets, even true random number generators are caught in his nets. If this list of ingredients bamboozles, flummoxes, and confounds, Frank Zappa helpfully likes to remind us that such knowledge is not absolutely necessary for our appreciation of the music. It's a bit like eating a sausage, he explains. You don't know what's in it. You probably shouldn't know what's in there, but if it tastes good, well, there you go. Just as the constellation of the Southern Cross maintains its identifiable configuration as it arcs through space over time, so too does the cycle of Luz Meridional, which Andrián has deliberately pitched into a particular sonic space, a region shaped by another great American composer, Elliott Carter. Andrián directly derives the pitch material for Luz Meridional from Elliott Carter's catalogue of 50 six-note chords as documented in his weighty and influential 2002 Harmony book. Elliott Carter, who continued to compose music until shortly before his death late last year at 103 years old, knew Henry Cowell personally and professionally. Their spheres overlapped severally. Carter sent some of his own early compositions to New Music Edition, a publication originally called New Music Quarterly, formed and single-handedly run by Cowell in 1927. And when Cowell retired from this endeavour in 1942, Carter took over at Cowell's request. Further, both Cowell and Carter were supported by, and in their turn supportive of, maverick American composer Charles Ives. On a more intimate level, Elliott Carter, writing in 1969 about his groundbreaking cello sonata, acknowledged his indebtedness to Henry Cowell, stating that alongside his rhythmic explorations of Indian, Arabic, Balinese, and African music, the techniques described in Cowell's new musical resources also furnished him with many ideas. The result was, he stated, a way of evolving rhythms and rhythmic continuities, sometimes called metric modulation. It is noteworthy, too, that Elliott Carter's own initial exposure to extra-European music was via Cowell's Symposia on Exotic Music in San Francisco in the 1920s. On the subject of Elliott Carter, it is pertinent to observe that in 2008, Julian Burnside also commissioned Andrián Pertout's Cinq Petites Melodies for Pianoforte, also written specifically for Michael, in celebration of Elliott Carter's 100th birthday. This composition was awarded the intriguingly named Friends and Enemies of New Music Composition Prize in New York in 2010. Michael premiered this Elliott Carter centenary composition at the University of Tasmania's Conservatorium Recital Hall. More centenaries. 2012 was not only the centenary year of the birth of Australian composers Peggy Glanville Hicks and Robert Hughes, both of whose works are directly employed in Luz Meridional, but 2012 was also the centenary of the birth of two other composers which, between their maximalist and minimalist approaches, give a sense of the true breadth of Henry Cowell's legacy. Conlon Nancarrow, ladies and gentlemen, is the first. Nancarrow owed many of his musical ideas to Henry Cowell. He encountered and devoured Cowell's new musical resources in 1939, and subsequently employed Cowell's theory of divisive rhythm, that is, dividing a large rhythmic unit or measure into various numbers of equal parts at once to create the effect of different tempos moving simultaneously. Cowell had hinted that this might only be achieved by the use of the mechanized player piano. Nancarrow, using the player piano, consequently produced some of the most rhythmically complex music ever written, enshrined in his Studies for Player Piano, music which is couched in intricate contrapuntal systems that employ up to 12 different tempos simultaneously. 2012 was also the centenary of the birth of John Cage, probably Cowell's most notorious student. Cage's compositions with prepared piano, where the instrument has its sound altered by placing objects, preparations, on or under the strings or on the hammers and dampers, were greatly inspired by Henry Cowell's experiments with what he termed string piano, where the performer plucks and scrapes the strings of the piano directly. There is also the intriguing possibility that Cage's so-called silent composition, 433, was directly inspired by a comment from Henry Cowell, who apparently remarked to Cage in around 1937 that it would be a pleasure to put a penny into the ubiquitous jukebox diner and get back 5 minutes of silence. When Joel Sachs, author of a recent and comprehensive biography on Henry Cowell, asked John Cage directly about it, Cage replied that he did not know, as he did not cultivate his memory. Silence, it seems, will have the last word on this matter. Let me now move to the 24 Australian composers whose quotations have been utilised as a starting point in Les Meridional. It is an interesting exercise to observe just which of the following names are familiar: Roy Agnew, John Anthill, Don Banks, Arthur Benjamin, Clive Douglas, Peggy Glanville Hicks, Eugene Goossens, Percy Granger, Raymond Hansen, Fritz Hart, Marjorie Hesse, Alfred Hill, Miri Hill, Dulcie Holland, Robert Hughes, Keith Humble, Frank Hutchins, Miriam Hyde, Horace Keats, Louis Lavater, Dorian Legalian, William Lovelock, James Penberthy, and Margaret Sutherland. I only recognise the names of 7 of these 24 composers and had heard compositions by merely 2. Part of the answer to the question of just why so many of these composers' names and their works might be unfamiliar can be gleaned from Michael Kieran Harvey's own impassioned and acerbic 2012 Peggy Glanville Hicks address, alive and living on YouTube. And part of his personal and practical approach to this deficiency is demonstrated by his own recording and release of dozens of new Australian works on the Move, Tall Poppies and Astra labels. 1 in 3 of Andrian's selected composers are female. Given that these women live to an average age of 86, this seems to be a sound vocational choice. Earliest born of the composers was Louis Lavater, born in 1867. Most recently deceased was Robert Hughes, who died at the age of 95 in 2007. Just under half of the compositions that Andrian has utilised are for solo piano. The rest are vocal, chamber and orchestral works. The earliest contribution that Les Meridional is tied to is Percy Granger's Colonial Song from 1911. The most recent that it alights from is the first of Keith Humble's 8 bagatelles, dating from 1992. Whilst the world of Henry Cowell may seem at a far remove from these Australian composers, there are many points of intersection. To mention just 2, Cowell was a proponent of Peggy Glanville Hicks music during his visit to India in the mid-1950s. And Percy Granger provided unstinting practical and moral support to Henry Cowell before, during, and after Cowell's 4-year period of detention in San Quentin. Percy Granger's staunch advocacy for one who has been involuntarily incarcerated brings me back to refugee advocate Julian Burnside QC. The penultimate line of his 2004 Peggy Glanville Hicks address is apt. A society without art leaves no children. With no past, it can have no future. Commencing with Roy Agnew's Sleeping Child for piano and ending with Margaret Sutherland's 6 Profiles, also for piano, the quotations that Andrian transform proceed non-chronologically. Each uses sequentially 2, and in just 2 instances, the 12th and 24th Etude 3, of Elliott Carter's 50 6-note chords as pitch material. Andrian's first etude, Niño Durmiente, is based on Roy Agnew's Sleeping Child and uses 6-note chords numbers 1 and 2. Seis Perfiles, the 24th etude, is based on Margaret Sutherland's 6 Profiles and uses the last 3 chords, numbers 48, 49 and 50. There are thus 3 levels of order built into les meridional as it proceeds. First, that which is derived from the alphabetic flow from A towards Z in the composer's surnames. Second, in the sequential occurrence of the 50 6-note chords catalogued by Elliott Carter. And third, the pieces are also organised according to a structure of contrasting slow and fast movements. Some of the names of Andrián's Études are clearly direct translations into equivalent Spanish from the English, such as number 11, Melancolia, based on Marjorie Hesse's Melancholy, and number 13, Meditación, based on Miri Hill's Meditation. But others are not. Number 13, Raymond Hansen's Concerto for Trumpet and Orchestra, returns as Nostalgia. And number 19, Horace Keats' lovely Sea Wraith, is reborn as Fantasma del Mar. Whilst it is true that in translating from one language to another, a loss might be incurred, the reverse also holds true. Some irreducible extra may accrue, as in these instances, with the additional poetic resonance of their new titles. Each étude is written as an hommages to the individual composer behind the piece, and overall, les meridional is a grand homenaje to Henry Cowell. Homenaje means not only homage or respectful tribute, but in Chile can apparently also carry the connotation of gift, a word that is itself generously ambiguous, working doubly, as Andrián's tribute to the deceased composer and as his re-gifting of their works elaborately wrapped in the 20th and 21st century cloth back to us.